Hi everybody, thanks for coming. My name is Piacente. A little bit about me before we get started. So I'm a retired attorney and law professor. In the 90s I was an expert in online legal research and wrote actually a number of textbooks on the topic and actually wrote the official online guide for the Lexis.com research service way back in the day. But after teaching law students for a while, I decided I wanted to go a different direction. So I started teaching SAT and really enjoyed it and decided that I really like working with high school students. And so in 2006 I started my own company doing this, and I've been doing SAT tutoring in the Bay Area ever since. I originally started out sort of just taking my Jeep up in the hills in Marin, but then I eventually had a classroom in my own house, and then had a classroom at Montecito Plaza for a while. And then I discovered that while I was doing that, about half my business was online. So I'm sitting here in this big space that I'm paying for, and decided that maybe it's just better for me to go online. And that happened right before the pandemic hit, which kind of worked out well. And so now I do basically tutoring online for the SAT and ACT. I used to have a bunch of tutors working for me, but I don't anymore. Since the break, it's sort of just having it just be me. So that's how this all came about. And I also have assisted for many years with different nonprofits and other groups. Obviously here at the library, we've been doing this program since 2012, and we also do now free practice tests for the SAT and ACT here. You were here for one of them, right? Yeah. We also, but I've also worked doing college nights at Terra Linda, taught some classes at San Rafael High School, worked with the San Rafael Library doing practice tests for a long time, and also worked with Huckleberry Youth Program. So this has sort of been me for the last 20 years. First thing first, let's talk about how important the tests really are, because there's a lot of conflicting information from a lot of different sources about what is important, how important are the tests, do I really need to take them? The information a lot of people are getting about this is actually, I think, a bit misleading in major media publications on this. And there's been a real emphasis to sort of downplay the importance of the test, and as we're going to see, probably to the detriment of people who are applying to colleges. Because what the impression they're giving about how important the tests are isn't really accurate as to what they are. And we're going to see why in a minute. We're also going to see why what your college counselor is telling you about when to use your scores and when to actually use them in your application is probably not correct either. So first of all, admission tests, you're required or optional. Is it test optional? What does that really mean? We're going to talk about that. But required or optional over 95% of schools. 83% of colleges say test scores are considerable or moderate importance. And let's talk about what that means. So here's the admissions factors of importance in college admissions. And as you can see, so grades in college prep courses especially are the most important thing. The strength of the curriculum is important. But there are what they call three legs of the stool here in terms of college admissions. It's your grades, it's your test scores, and then it's your extracurriculars and other things. Your application, your essays. But as you can see, for admission test scores, this is 83% of all schools consider it of considerable or moderate importance. All right, so the other thing about the test is that raising your scores is the easiest way to improve and most effective way to improve your chance of admission. You can try and get your grade point average up, and you can study really hard, and you can get really good grades one semester, but that's 1/8 of your grade point average, right? So if you get started, if you don't have a great grade point average, it's really hard to get that to a really good level in a short period of time. If you take a test, if you study for the test and you go up, say, 30 percentiles, let's say, all of a sudden your range of options for your schools goes up that much more, and it really does kind of explode your options if you get into another level. And we'll talk all about scores as well today, but it really does improve your chances of admission. And using, say, an 8 or 10 week program. To get going, to make it happen. That's the easiest way to really improve your chances. Okay, so students with standardized test scores in the top 25% of their incoming freshman class for college are also typically the ones that qualify for academic scholarships. So it's another reason to take the test because you can get money back. I tell the story. I had a student. I've had a couple of students do this, but I had one student. She was already in college. Usually, I don't get calls from seniors looking for SAT and ACT help. But she was a second semester senior. She had just gotten to college, but they told her she had a 25 on her ACTs. They told her if she got a 29 on her ACT, it would be, if she was an athlete, and if she got a 29, it would be worth basically a full ride for her, which was $12,500 tuition a year. So we got her this. It was 4 points on the ACT. We got her the 29. She got the scholarship, and it turned out to be about $50,000 worth of scholarship money for her. So it can, in that situation. Now that's not always typical, but in that situation, that's how investing in her scores really paid off well for her on that. But it's something to think about too. Like, my scores just to get me in the best school possible. Sometimes if you get your scores up, even if you're feel fairly confident you can get in with your scores, sometimes you boost your scores, you can get money back if you like the school you want to be at. It's not always about just trying to get in the best reputation school. Sometimes a school, if you really like the school, maybe you can bump your scores up and get some money back for it. So it's something to think about as well. And that the 25%, really, they do use those ACT and SAT scores for academic scholarships more than anything else in terms of determining that. Okay, so let's talk required versus optional. So required is just basically the old school thing. All students, it's for test required schools. All students must submit either ACT scores or applying. Now, some people say, well, is it the ACT or the SAT? Or the ones take one or the other? Because when we were all kind of growing up, that's how it was. Now everybody takes both either the ACT or the SAT score. For test optional, all right, students may submit ACT or SAT scores when applying for admission. They basically are taking out the bottom third of the SAT scores and opening it up to open admissions. That's how it's working. And we're going to see more about this in a sec. But what happens is the impact of that is if you take out the bottom third of your SAT scores, well, all of a sudden your average SAT scores are going to go up because you've just cut out the bottom third of all the numbers, right? So what you saw in the wake of test optional was all of a sudden all these schools, their SAT numbers all of a sudden went up. They didn't do anything different. They just cut out the bottom third of the students basically, so that all their scores on the average went up overall. It increased the number of applications as well. You're getting a lot more applications from a lot of different places because now all of a sudden, Yale doesn't have to do test optional. They don't require scores, and everybody wants to apply to Yale, so they get swamped with non-test applications, and it decreases the acceptance rate because if you're getting all these more applications, all of a sudden the acceptance rate in general goes down. Okay, so even with test optional, 67% of test optional schools, not all schools, we saw that 80, something percent, 67% of test optional schools say a competitive test score helps your student application. Okay, so that there is, it's still going to help you, and let's really talk about why. The lined bar is the admissions rates for students who did not submit scores, whereas the solid line is the admission rate for students who did submit scores. So Boston College keeps coming up, so let's take that at the end here. Boston College had a little bit under a 10% admit rate for students who did not submit scores, but looks like almost 25% rate for students who did submit scores. So the rate that they were admitting students at Boston College last year was 2.7 times for students who did submit scores over students who didn't. And if you could look at all of these schools, the only time it actually comes up to even is in these early decision ones, and that's great because they're letting in sort of the early decisions students. They're letting in a lot of legacy students and things that they don't really want to see their scores. So on the early decision side, they're more willing to do it. But once you get into the regular pool, all of a sudden you're 2 times more likely to get in, basically, if you submit scores as if you don't. Make sense? So when they say test optional, it sounds like, oh, we don't have to submit scores, they don't care, one way or the other, it won't matter. It really does matter because for these schools, these tests are really all about helping them find out who's going, like I said, who's going to make it through first year. And if they don't have those scores, that's why that's why the schools wanted the scores in the first place. And if they don't have them, they really can't tell. So before test optional, let's say this was your average score range here, and this is just a hypothetical school. This isn't any specific school in general, but a hypothetical school. Score range, and the score range, by the way, is when they say top 50, bottom 50 of that score range, that's the 25th to 75th percentile. That's the middle 50 percentile of people in the score range, but just to be clear. So let's say the score range here for this school was 1250 to 1450. That's basically, if you look on any sort of what's the score range for a school, that's what they would promote. That's what they would publish. So if you had a 1350, you're basically straight in the middle of all the students taking the SAT. You're pretty much, and even if you're in the bottom 50, if you've got some good grades, you're pretty much going to get in. It's only when you get to the bottom of that 50, like around 1250 or even below it, where you're kind of on the bubble. After test optional, this is what it starts to look like. They lop off that last part and they say, okay, well, if you're below, say, 1300, we're going to kind of put you in the pile with all the other with the students that didn't, and we're going to see how that works. And the bottom 50 to the top 50, that all shifts up. But the thing about it is, and this is why I said your college counselor is probably telling you the wrong information about this. So a lot of college counselors, including, and I have a lot of friends who are college counselors, and I love them to death, but on this topic, they are not correct here. And this is what happened. Basically, this has become sort of a mantra for college counselors to tell you how you deal with test optional. What your college counselor tells you to do for test optional, if you're not in the top 50% of SAT scores for a test optional school, don't send your scores. Talk to college counselors. That's what they will tell you. Okay? In my opinion, it's completely false. Okay, because here's the deal. What they're saying is that if you have a 1350 now, which is in the bottom 50% of the new under test optional, where it used to be right in the middle, you shouldn't submit your score. You should only submit your score if you're over 1400. All right? But let's think about that for a minute. Let's say you have a 1350 and you don't submit your score. So you send in your application with everybody else. They're going to assume you don't have a 1300. They can't assume you're actually in the score range, because if you weren't, why wouldn't you have submitted scores in the first place? They don't know that your college counselor told you not to submit scores. They're going to assume you were less than 1350. So you're actually hurting your chances by not showing, hey, I'm in the range, which the SAT scores show are going to get me through your school. I can handle the work. You see what I'm saying? So when a college counselor says that, it just doesn't make any sense to me. This is helping your score. This is going to help your application. If you're in that range, regardless of what it is, that's going to help your application. I would argue that even if you're down below, say, 1300 in this example, you should still submit scores, because who are you competing with? Somebody who may have a 1200? You know, you can say, I got a 1290, I got a 1280. Well, they're going to still look at you a lot more favorably than the vast majority of no score students at all, because they have no idea about those students. And that's what a lot of schools are saying. A lot of schools are coming back to test required and implementing that. And we're going to see this in a minute. But a lot of things they're saying is that we went test optional for a couple of years and it's not working, because a lot of students who would have gotten into our school didn't, because they didn't give us their scores. And that's what's happening now. And so they really can't know that they really don't know, and especially at that bottom level, those are where the scores are important. If a student has a 1400 versus a 1450, you know they're going to do well at that school. It's going to be fine. But what the college admission counselors really want to know is where the bubble is. That's when we really need the scores, and that's the ones that they've sort of washed out. Don't write it off because you're not in the top 50%. I wouldn't even write it off if you don't even make the bottom 50%. Because if you're close, you're competing with a third of the students who aren't submitting scores at all. They know, they have a much better idea of you, and they know that you're at the top of that list. Because if you're not submitting scores at all, there's no way they can assume you're going to be within that range, because they're first. I mean, why wouldn't you submit scores if you were in the range?
Right.
You see what I'm saying? And this is why it's really important. This is why what people are telling people about test optional really isn't playing out in real life. And the strategies that you have, that's why the scores are extremely important, much more important than everybody, they are leading people to believe. And it's the pendulum now is starting to swing back. Just in February, every day there was another article of some school that was switching from test optional back to test required. Dartmouth, Brown, MIT, Yale. That's why these highly selective schools are all going back to this, because they can't tell. They're getting swamped with applications from people. Yeah, a lot of people have good grades, but we don't know anything else about them. Those scores are really good at breaking down specific areas of weakness and strength. This is why they give the test in the first place. And so a lot of these schools are saying, it's not working for us. And it is swinging back to test required. Now, where all these selective schools go, that the other schools are going to follow, if not next year, then the year after. So if you're planning in the future, it's, I can just go test optional. I don't want to deal with the whole thing about an SAT. It's really hurting your chances. It really is not an easy way out on this at all. Okay, so basically take the test, expand your college choices, improves your admission chances, and increases scholarship opportunities. For all those reasons, it's really important to take the test. Okay, so let's talk about so on top of everything, the SAT decided to change up its entire test for this year, both format and content. They made it shorter. It's a digital format, and it's all online. Basically, you go into the testing center. You can bring your own laptop in, or you can have a laptop for them, and you can take the SAT online in the testing center. It's adaptive, and what that means is the way they're determining scores now, the first module for both verbal and math is a standard module, and then depending on how well you do on that, they either give you the second module, which is harder, or easier. If it's easier, then basically the scores tend to seem, I don't want to say this is a hard fast rule, if you get the harder module, you're basically above a 600, and then you just see how far you can go up the list on the harder stuff. If you get the lower module, the easier module, then chances are the best you can get is about a 600. And that seems to be the trend right now in terms of that. I don't want to say that for specific because I don't have any insight into that, but that just seems to be how they're doing the model on the scores for that. So you want to make sure you get into the harder module, and then see how much you can ramp your score up. That's how the adaptive works, and it's designed so that they can do less questions and have still a good statistical model. Big verbal changes on this. The math didn't change too much, but there were big verbal changes. The passage changed. The shorter passage on these long paragraph or long, multi-paragraph passages, basically one paragraph. You analyze it. It's much more new question types. It's much more like I do a lot of LSAT training as well. It's very kind of similar to the LSAT, not as hard, obviously, in terms of, what's good support, what would weaken the argument, what would strengthen the argument, things like that. What's the good conclusion here, and so on. It's very much like that. There's no essay anymore, and this is true for if you're signing up for the SAT or the ACT, no essay. You don't need the essay. This is not your college essay. This is the essay for the test itself. The ACT still has it. When they did the revision in 2015, both the SAT and ACT came in and put in this essay. Basically, it was designed to give the colleges a raw writing sample in case they think you didn't write your college essay. That was the only reason it was there for. They weren't looking for it. They scored it, but it really wasn't taken into account. And now the colleges are all just like not dealing with the essay requirement anymore. It's more trouble than it's worth. So even though the ACT still offers the essay, you don't need to sign up. Most of the colleges don't need to see it anymore. Okay? And the SAT, and this just got rid of entirely. I'm looking for the ACT to follow it soon. All right, and finally, return of vocabulary words, which for me I think is a great thing. In 2015, they decided, we don't need these hard vocabulary words. What good are they to help you get into college? What good is your vocabulary? Now they've decided to actually bring them back because it is important, right? To have a nice vocabulary, and it should be a gauge on your education. So they brought that back as well. Okay, so let's compare the tests, ACT versus SAT now. And as far as I'm concerned, as a tutor, I'm happy to teach ACT or SAT. I have no preference in terms of what I like to teach. There are differences and similarities to the tests, and a lot of stuff carries over, but there are differences as well. So basically, the scoring for the ACT, it's 4 subjects. Each subject, you have the range of 0 to 36 points, and they average in all of your scores for what they call your composite score, which is the best scores of 36 as well. On the SAT, 2 subjects, 2 to 800 points each, verbal on one side, math on the other. And what they do is they just add those scores together. So the best score you can get on the SAT is 1,600 total. All right, so basically what's the difference between the 2 tests sort of qualitatively? The ACT, I like to say, is much more of a sprint. The questions are easier overall. Objectively, they're easier. They're just much more straightforward. They're not as tricky. But you got to move quickly because there's a lot of questions in a very short period of time. You got to move fast, and that's the biggest thing on the ACT that gives students trouble is that they need to move more quickly. On the SAT, you have much more time. Even though it's a shorter test now, you still have much more time per question. The SAT is much more of a sort of its roots come from sort of IQ tests, and so there's still a lot of IQ sort of testing that kind of works within the test sort of subtly. And the questions tend to be a little more tricky. Once you know the tricks, it's okay. But it's a matter of sort of knowing the tricks and knowing the puzzles and knowing how to work the questions and how to apply specific formulas. And it does get a little esoteric in terms of the content. So you really have to kind of know specific things that even if you're a good student, you might not figure out just right off the bat. ACT is much more obvious about what they're testing than the SAT is sometimes on that. But it's not as quick, so you have more time to sort of think about the questions. And the total testing time, 3 hours, 5 minutes versus 2 hours, 24 minutes. The practice test is PLAN for the ACT is sophomore year. Practice test, PSAT, they give it sophomore and junior. A lot of schools give that fall of junior year. Okay, so I only recommend using official tests. I think I saw.
I know. I was going to ask you, is this one?
I saw. Yeah, that's not the official.
It's
The
not.
Princeton Review is not Kaplan. They're all not official books.
Oh.
Okay, so sorry about that. But the real ACT prep guide, the digital SAT study guide. Now, people ask me about Khan Academy. I like Khan Academy. Khan Academy is great. They're affiliated with the College Board, and the questions on there are certainly legitimate and certainly helpful in using that. Can you use them to study by yourself? Sure. But you really want somebody who's going to be able to take you through this and show you how to do it. It's not just a matter of, oh, I got that question right, I got this question right. There are a lot of things you want to know about the tests and strategies in terms of not just the content, but the ways to answer the content quickly. Okay, so when to start prepping? Okay, so earliest start prepping, if you're going into junior year, summer going into junior year, you can start early if you want, but chances are you're going to be doing it because developmentally students really just are developmentally ready to take this test starting summer going into junior year. So if you're going to be a junior, summer's a great time to start because you don't have a lot of other things going on. You've got, so you don't have many distractions, but you also have a little bit of intellectual stimulation during the summer so you don't get that going, that summer brain going. So it keeps you a little bit focused. It keeps you, so when you come back to school, at least you're feeling a little bit of intellectually stimulating thing to do for that. But in general, summer's a really good time to start because you get all the basic training out of the way in the summer, and then you can get into school, and then you know what's going on, these tests going through. And you have such a leg up. I tell people when they get into early, you have such a leg up over your peers because you just feel so much more confident because you know what's going on. You're not struggling, cramming at the end of the semester to try and get in there and things. So it really does help to get started early. Best time early junior year. I do like starting in junior year, I get them back into school, get them back in the swing of things and then start testing. Again, you'll hear college counselors telling you shouldn't start till like March to take the test the first time. But I really find that for my programs, the best scores I get are students who start either in the summer or going in the fall and we're going to talk about the calendar in a minute, and take a test first semester, and then take the test the second time, say March, say the March test. We'll talk about the calendar in a minute. Take a test the first time, the end of the semester, just to get get on the board, so that you feel really confident going in for the spring. And I really like that. That's why I like to get students started early. The longer you wait, the tougher it gets to start. And that's true. The toughest is late junior year, like right now. Now, it's not a bad idea to get some numbers in going into the summer if you're a junior, with the idea that you're going to do something in the fall. Because you want to take this thing, and we're going to see this, you want to take it at least twice to get on the road. And then latest, early senior year, I do have some students who just, for whatever reason, have not decided they want to take the test. Maybe I got to take it. Hey, look, optional isn't really what I think it's going to be, right? And so you can start senior year, and I get a lot of seniors who do very well because they're more mature and they've already developed their skills and everything, and they're much better readers. Seniors are much better readers than juniors for some reason. It's more than anything else. So you can do that count and still do very well. So I always tell students to take the test at least twice. This says 63% of test takers improve their scores by taking the SAT more than once. I think it's higher than that, at least for my students. If I have students taking this test twice, very rarely are they going to use the numbers from the first one. Chances are the second test is always almost always a better test. It's just, you jump in the pool the first time, you swim, you don't swim as well as when you jump in the pool the second time. And it really is, they get all the nerves out, they get all of the different things, they know what to expect, it's not just this foreign thing, and they've had a little more time to go over the results and see what they're missing and work on it, polish it up, and it is the second time and even the third time they take it that you really see the numbers pop, but especially the second time, it's like they get out of that first one saying, hey, I did a little better, I did better, but I still think I've got another level to go to, and that's that second time that you see it that you really see the numbers go. This is nearly 20 years of doing this. This is just how it works. This is how it works, and this shows it up, but I even think it's worse. It's more than that. Okay, let's talk about the calendar here. So basically, like I said, I like students taking that early December test for the SAT or ACT in that first semester junior year, just to get some numbers on the board, so that when you take it again in either the February or March for the ACT or SAT, you really have, you're really maximizing your possibilities on that. The other test that is really good, especially for seniors, is that mid-September, early October SAT. Those are the dates that I get the best scores, bar none. Seniors taking those that mid-September, October tests are by far the best. They're back in school. They're not burnt out by the school year yet, 3-4 weeks into the school year, but their clocks are back on the schedule. They're also really focused on college, so they're really making this a priority, and the focus for it is really good. So that tends to be a really good test to take. I know a lot of students want to take that late August SAT. They say, I'll just take the late August SAT and I'll be done with this. I don't have to worry about when school starts. The problem is their brains in late August are just still way on the beach. And it's just, if you want to take it as a sort of a precursor to taking the SAT, the October SAT, that's fine, but those August scores just never seem to work out very well. They're just not in the swing of things. It's just the way it is. Okay, so choosing a test prep tutor. I do private tutoring. I also do small groups as well. And private tutoring is by far the most effective because I can really drill down on your specific strengths and weaknesses. If you're getting a bunch of questions right on specific topics, I don't need to work on those. I need to work on the stuff. I need to work with the low-hanging fruit with the stuff you're not getting right. That's how I get you better and how I improve your score. So private tutors, it's the best way to do it because you can really drill down on specific strengths and weaknesses. Now, sometimes, you can do small groups as well. I do small groups up to 4 students. And you can save a little money doing it that way if you can find some. But I don't like to do just random groups. I like to do groups of friends or something who sort of know each other and sort of peers. So if you put together your own small group, I'll do that as well. Either semi-private. Sometimes, if I have siblings, I'll do semi-privates, either twins or those born close together. But 3 or 4, small group of 3 or 4 will also I'll also do as well. Then large groups or least big, just want to take a class just to see what's on the test. That's fine, but it's really not going to necessarily help you as much as somebody looking over and telling you what you're missing. Does a company, different things about the company's reputation, does it specialize in test prep, or is it just like a basic tutoring service? You're never going to get anybody who specializes in this stuff. There's really differences between this and academic tutoring. So you really want something is a specialist in this. People require a contract? I mostly just pay as you go, but companies do want you to sign up for, a lot of lessons and sort of do the whole package thing. And do they have a record of success? Have they been doing this a while? Have they seen improvements in numbers? Avoid score guarantees. They're a gimmick. Mostly it's just, well, you didn't do well on our score. You can take our program again, but it didn't work the first time, so why would it help us the second time? So score guarantees really don't mean much. Okay, so when you're analyzing the program, does it have a set curriculum? Is it just like this, what we're going to do? Now, I say this, but the longer I do this, the more I can just kind of analyze students. So I do have a set curriculum, things I know I need to work on. But for me, I've gotten much better at just figuring out where the weaknesses are and going through. But there is a comprehensive program to this. Practice tests with official questions. We talked about why official questions are important. Do they have online materials? That becomes important as well. And is there a follow-up? Is it just like, you did the course, see you later? Or are they actually, concerned about whether or not how you did and whether or not, what's going on? In terms of instructors, this is tough to get even if you call up premium test prep students. One tutor for all subjects, especially for larger test prep companies. The economics of it are really, they hire basically grad students for the most part, trying to make some extra beer money or whatever while they're going to school or whatever. And so a lot of times they'll hire, either a math grad student or somebody doing a master's in literature or something. So you get verbal or math, but you very rarely get tutors that can teach both subjects. And it really is important because a lot of times, the student be like, well, I don't like my math tutor, I don't like my, or I don't like my, I like my math tutor better than like my verbal tutor, vice versa, and so on. And you don't want them to get into that whole thing. And not only that, you have one tutor who knows your student well. Are they experienced? And are they a real teacher? Are they just like, I got the score, so that means I can teach it, or can they really teach it? Just because you got a good score doesn't mean you can teach how to get it. All right, so I do also do a lot of work with students who need extra time and accommodations, students who have ADHD or things like that. You need a professional diagnosis and approval of your school. Get started early on this. I will tell you that ACT is harder to get, but it's more helpful. Because most of the accommodations come with extra time. So extra time in the ACT is really helpful. Extra time in the SAT is not that helpful because most students have enough time to finish anyway. But the ACT, remember, it's really a sprint. So if you do have extra time, it's really, really helpful. It's tougher to get. The ACT is more stringent because they know, that their test is a time-intensive test. But if you can get it on if you get extra time, take the ACT. Okay, so deadlines, test registration, deadlines about a month before test date. Now, the test centers are extremely full. They shut down a lot of them during COVID. They have yet to make too much of a comeback. They're talking about a lot of things right now, but a lot of people have been complaining that it's tough to get into the test centers right now. So get started early, know what you're doing, sign up for those dates as early as you can. 6 to 8 months ahead, I'm saying right now, it's not uncommon. Get in there and get online and find the test center and they fill up so fast. There will be people who cancel, especially closer on. So you can sneak in, but you got to keep kind of clicking to see what's available as you're doing it. But you can get in, but you're just looking for an opening. So if you want to avoid that, if you want to make sure you can set up your, get your test center scheduled, because I have people planning vacations around their ACT like this summer to go out of state to take it. Because California actually is underserved, and Marin has always been underserved in terms of this. There are always more test takers than there are seats available. So get in early. I can't stress this enough, especially in this environment right now. Okay, another tip on the ACT, they used to do this in the SAT, but now that they've gone digital, they don't do it anymore. But in the ACT, there's certain times a year, the April test, the June test, and the December test, you can actually order the actual test you took. So they'll give you a copy of the booklet of the test you took, including your scores. And if, as a tutor, this is a great thing because I can see exactly what the student missed. So it's a really good tip if you're taking one of those tests to get the booklet. Makes sense, right? When you're signing up for registration, though, do not submit score reports. They want us, you send it off to Harvard, send it off to Yale, right? You don't know what you got yet, right? So don't submit any scores during registration. You have plenty of time to submit them when all the scores are done and you get your application, you're ready to do your applications, you know what your scores, your final scores are. We're going to talk about scoring in a minute. But don't submit anything during registration. You don't know where you're going. It doesn't do you any good to try and get in early with these numbers because we're not going to look at them anyway until all the applications are in. Okay, so let's talk about understanding scores now. Basically, you can see the percentiles here for the different scores, and they sort of match up along those lines. So for instance, if you're at the 500 level on the SAT, that's sort of minimal college readiness. At 600, say 1200, that's around around the 75th percentile. That's where the more selective schools start. Okay? And then at 700, that's around the 95th percentile. That's when the very selective schools start. So if you're around the 1400 range, and matches up with about a 30 and 25 and so on. So people say, well, how much can test prep really help? What we want to do, people say, oh, we'll get you a perfect score. Don't listen to that. It's very difficult to get a perfect score no matter how much training you've had, no matter how good you are. It's a very difficult number to get. But with that said, it doesn't take a lot to really improve your numbers. We want to get you solidly into the next level. Let's say you're at sort of, 50th percentile, mid fives. If I get you into the mid sixes on both of these, all of a sudden you've got up 30 percentiles. And it's a huge bounce, and you're really putting yourself in a level to compete. If you're in that 600 level, we want to get you up in the 700s. We want to get you from, say, the 75th percentile. We want to get you up in the 95th percentile. And it really doesn't take that much in terms of training to be able to do that. On the old SAT, this is the old one. The new one's a little different now. But the old one, it used to be every question you got right was another 10 points in your scaled score. Just one extra question right that you didn't get right before. So you can really do a lot in terms of just knowing the test, knowing the content, everything about it. You can really do yourself a favor and really bounce yourself into a much more competitive level. And that's what we try to do. Any questions on any of that? All right, so sending your scores. So only send your scores after all of your testing is done. There's no sense, if you try to take this at least twice, you don't want to send it out after the first one, because chances are you're going to do better in the second one anyway. So wait until all of your scores are in before you submit it. Now, the one caveat that is if you're going early decision or early action. Basically, this is how it works. If you are going early decision, the last test you can take is either that mid-September ACT or early October SAT. If you're going early decision, okay? If you're not going early decision, you can take also the October, November, even the December tests, and you can still submit your scores. Even if your application, say, had to be in November 1st, they'll still take those November and December scores because they're not going to look at anything until after the first year anyway. So unless you're going early decision, you still have time in the fall for that. But the point is, if you are going early decision, that September, October test dates are the last ones you can take. Make sense? Okay. So most colleges will accept the best test sittings. So most colleges will do what's known as superscore. Let's talk about superscore really quick. Superscore is this. Let's say the first time you take a test, let's say you get a 600 on your math, 700 on your verbal. Okay, so for 1300. And then let's say the next time you take it, you get a 700 on your verbal and a 600 on your math. Is that what I did? I think I did the other way. Okay, all right. So what superscore allows you to do is you submit your best test sittings. So you submit scores from both of those sittings
And they'll count your score as a 1400, as a 700 on both. Does that make sense? And that's what superscore is. And ACT, they used to not superscore ACT, now they're superscoring ACT as well. So if you get a really nice math number on one test, you didn't do so well on the verbal side, maybe on the grammar, and you really work on the grammar and get that up, all of a sudden you submit those, and they'll take your best, and they'll take what they call your superscore. So it's not all this pressure to just do really well one time. If you get a number chalked up on the board, say early, sometimes, it's nice that first test, you sometimes get, you get a breakout number on something that even if I don't take the test again, I'm happy with that score. You've got that. It's already, and then you just ratchet up the other numbers. So it's really easy taking it again to sort of work on the other things. Yeah, yeah. A few colleges want to see all sittings, very few, and will only accept the best thing. There's a real handful of those anymore. Almost all schools will superscore now.